put this gospel into context. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus instructs his followers about the power of faith and the duties of discipleship. He calls his disciples to adopt the attitude of servants whose actions are responses to their identity rather than works seeking reward. The Holy Gospel according to Luke. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And Jesus replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your servant who has just come in from plowing or tending the sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you rather not say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink, and later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the servant for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'The work is done, and we have done what we ought to have done.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you.
Our friend Martin Luther defines faith in the following way. Faith is God's work in us. It changes us and gives us a new birth from God. It makes us completely different people. It changes our hearts, our spirits, our thoughts, and all our behaviors. It is a living, creative, active, and powerful thing, this faith. Faith, he says, cannot help but do good works constantly. It doesn't stop to ask if good works ought to be done, but before anyone asks, it has already done them and continues to do them without ceasing. Unquote. Essentially, what Luther is getting at here is that faith itself is a gift from God, and it changes us from the inside out. Faith compels us to act in a certain way, to do good works for our neighbors and for the world, not because our salvation depends on it. Jesus has already taken care of that. But because it's a response to this amazing love that we experience freely given from God through Jesus Christ. Faith is a gift, and we respond by putting that faith in action. The seeds of faith in us grow and blossom, and we cannot help but live it out in our daily lives and live in response to it. This is what Jesus is getting at in his gospel lesson today. Jesus gives us this example of a servant going about a servant's duties, and he invites his disciples to think about whether or not servants should be especially thanked just for doing what they are supposed to do. Now, any parents out there ever raise a teenager? So a few years ago, I was colleagues with another pastor who at that time was parenting her teenager, and when this text came up in our text study, she said, "All I can hear when I hear Jesus speaking in this text is the voice of my teenager son saying, 'Mom, I did my laundry today and you didn't even thank me.'" Well, she went on to say, he had been doing his laundry for years. It's just what the expectation was. You have dirty laundry, you just do it. You take care of it. It's just what you do. Jesus is getting at the same thing here. He says, don't worry about how much faith that you have or don't have. That's not the point. Whatever level of faith you have is enough, because God is going to take it and do something with it. We plant our seeds of faith, and God gives the growth. In the words of Pastor David Lose, perhaps faithfulness is simply doing what needs to be done. Maybe our faith doesn't have to be heroic, like going to another country to serve as a doctor or missionary. Maybe instead, he said, maybe faith is just being attentive to the needs around us and committing ourselves to do what we can with what we've got, trusting that God will make use of it, unquote. So then Pastor Los goes on to tell a story about a few folks in Detroit, Michigan, who did just that. A few years back, the city of Detroit decided that it would start closing playgrounds in the city itself. Not by building fences around there and putting a big for closer, sign on the playground, but rather just to cut costs by stopping the upkeep and the mowing service. And a few people took note of this, and one man in particular thought, I have a mower, I can start mowing. And little by little, he'd just show up and start mowing the playgrounds. And he would watch after a few weeks that there must have been kids in the apartments around, because as soon as he'd stop mowing around the swings, there'd be kids coming out to play on that playground after he mowed the playground. Well, the movement grew, and there were more parks that he wanted to take on. So he got some friends to join him in that effort, and they gave themselves a name. They called themselves the Detroit Mower Gang. I'm going to show you a few pictures up here on the screen. This is one of the playgrounds. You can see them mowing in the background. That's when it was overgrown. No child will be able to safely play in there. But there they are doing their ministry. Let's flip to the next one. This is a new member of the Detroit Mower Gang on the mower for the first time. Let's flip to the next one. Here's a few of the members of the Detroit Mower Gang all lined up, ready to go. And let's flip to the next one. And you can even see a little emblem on the back of their mower that says, Mower Gang Detroit. Did you see that? Instead of complaining or shaking their heads or trash talking the city of Detroit, they just said, we can make a difference, and they jumped in and they did it. Lots of kids were impacted by this small step of ministry. And the movement grew too. Local football teams started playing on the open lots that then had space to play. And they said, is there any way we can help? So then they got some mowers, and it just multiplied out and multiplied out. God grew what was able to happen through that idea. Now, at one point, the founder of the Detroit Mower Gang was interviewed by an urban renewal group, and the interviewer asked the founder, Tom, is that what social innovation is, when people like you from outside the system see low-hanging fruit and say, I can do that? And this was an interview that was taped, so you can actually watch it on YouTube. And in the interview video, Tom kind of pauses, and then he says, I don't know. I don't think about these things the way that you guys think about these things. I just saw a need that needed to be addressed, and I wanted to make a difference with something that was fun and impactful, and I found some people who wanted to do that with me, unquote. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be rocket science. We can see a need, and we can do it. This simple act of faith is making a difference in the life of those neighbors around Tom, especially the littlest neighbors in Detroit. And I don't know if the Detroit Mower Gang are a bunch of people of faith or not, but what I do know is that this is a beautiful example of what discipleship is. Not for the recognition or the attention or the accolades, but simply to make a difference in their community because that's just what they feel called to do. And we, as disciples of Jesus, as everyday saints, we too are called to this work of putting our faith into action. We are called by God as partners and co-creators with God to make the world a fuller vision of what God desires. We're called to embody that love and grace and forgiveness of Christ wherever and whenever we are around other people. We're called to care for those in need who are around us, to stand with solidarity with those who are in need, to love and befriend those who could really use a friend, to speak up in the face of injustice, to denounce bigotry and hate, to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and welcome the stranger, to protect the vulnerable and to give a voice to the voiceless. Essentially, to plant seeds of faith wherever we go, nurturing a space for God's love to take root. Now, we do this in big ways and small ways in our everyday lives, but we're not always great at recognizing it, especially in ourselves. Sometimes it's easier for us to recognize it in others. So we're going to take a few moments today. This is a part of what we're trying to do as Good Soil to deepen our relationships with each other and grow in faith together. We're going to throw a reflection question up on the screen. Take a few moments to think on your own about this question. Who is an everyday saint who puts their faith in action through good works? In other words, who is someone you know who sees a need and does what needs to be done in order to make a difference? So think a few moments about this, and then you'll be invited to get up, find someone you don't know or don't know well, introduce one another, and then share your responses together. We'll have a few moments to do this. Go ahead and think about your answer, stand up and find someone to pair off with, and share your responses. On your mark, get set, go. Thank you for your good sharing. We have some comments online that we're going to share with everybody too from our folks that are joining us online. So Scott, will you share what those are for us?
Sorry about that. Mark Liston said, our former CEO, Dina, we went out to lunch and she saw a scruffy man in the parking lot. Without hesitation, she went over and asked him if he would like her leftover steak. He took it and they blessed each other.
Amen. Anybody else on there you want to share? Okay, good with that one. Thank you for your good sharing. I wanted to add one more piece to this sermon, this idea of jumping in when we feel like there's a need, especially in light of all the images that we've seen from Hurricane Ian. There is still a way to plant seeds of faith in action. Our prayers make a difference. And when we see the images on the screen, it can be tempting to just scroll through our news feed or turn off the TV or stop listening because it's so hard. That feeling in our gut is there for a reason. It's hard to take in. But that is holy compassion. And the word compassion literally means to suffer with. Jesus often in the scriptures is said to have felt deep compassion for people that he interacted with. And so we as people of faith can lean into that compassion, suffer with those who are suffering, offer our prayers, and also offer our financial support. So we too are invited to give towards Lutheran disaster response as a love offering. If you haven't already, you're invited to contemplate that. We can plant seeds of faith, and God is the one who gives the growth. Amen.